RSM of the R.L.I.
Correct.
So you were there when the R.L.I. was formed. Tell us about the early days of the R.L.I.
Well, you've got to go back into a little bit of the Central African history. I can't remember the exact date, but the federation was formed of what was then Northern Rhodesia, which is now Zambia.
About 56, 57, somewhere in there?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
You can pick it up out of a book. So Southern Rhodesia, Northern Rhodesia and Nyasaland were amalgamated into a federation. And we then, the Federal Army as it became, took on the existing regiments, which were 2 battalions of the King's African Rifles, 1 battalion of the Northern Rhodesian Regiment, and to balance the racial structure, because it was predominantly black, all the regiments, white officer and white NCO, the Rhodesian African Rifles as well. They decided to get some white units. So the Rhodesian Light Infantry was formed, and that was an all-white regiment. A squadron of the SS was formed, and a squadron of armoured cars, which strangely enough was called the Selous Scouts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because it was a reconnaissance. And the early days of the R.L.I. were, I was a Sergeant Major in the School of Infantry. I'd been there for about 7 years. And I was chosen to be the first RSM of the R.L.I. Now what happened was they recruited in England, they recruited in South Africa, they recruited in Rhodesia. So they started off as a training unit in a place called Reid-Daly Barracks in Bulawayo, which was an old Air Force station, a really pretty run down barracks because it had been neglected after the Second World War, pretty much. So we must have had about 1,000 odd guys from these different countries running around. The Federal Army made a huge mistake. We had a huge training depot in Llewellyn Barracks, but that was for national servicemen. The instructors had been trained, a lot of them by me, in the School of Infantry in Gwele. So each training company was very well established as regards instructors, highly qualified guys. And what they should have done is taken a couple of those companies and allocated the new recruits for the R.L.I. regiment into those companies, put them through their basic recruit courses there. You could have then selected and all the misfits kicked out before they could cause any mischief. But they didn't do that. So we had 1,000 odd guys, and the cry was train yourselves. So we had a few NCOs from the British Army, a couple from the South African Army, and a few from the Rhodesian Army, and myself. And we had to get down and start trying to get some order out of that. The reason I'm telling you this, and I'm just sketching over it, was because it took so long to get rid of the rubbish. We got a very bad name in Bulawayo, so much so that there was an editorial in one of the newspapers requesting that we either get disbanded or jack ourselves up. And it wasn't the fault of the officers and the warrant officers and NCOs. A, we didn't have enough of them, and B, a lot of them weren't trained instructors. You know, in the British Army, You can be a sergeant or sergeant major but have no idea whatsoever about instruction. It's a particular skill you go to these military schools to learn. Drill instructors, weapons instructors, tactical instructors, signals instructors. You all go to on different courses and get yourself jacked up there. And this, unfortunately, we didn't have. But eventually, we got over the hump. We got chaps trained. We sent young NCOs to the School of Infantry and gradually built up our own team of instructors. Plus, we sent potential chaps who looked as they had good NCO potential to our School of Infantry, where they went through the different courses, and so gradually we started developing into a proper unit. But it was tough going in the beginning. It really was.
How long were you with the R.L.I?
I was with the R.L.I 13 years. I was commissioned into the R.L.I. It's very seldom that an other rank, as you know, if you're not an officer, if he's commissioned, it's very rare that he stays with the battalion. But I was commissioned in the R.L.I and I became initially the training officer for the whole battalion. As I say, it's very seldom that anybody commissioned from the ranks remained in that regiment, but I did, and initially was the training officer for the battalion. The School of Infantry experience I had behind me was great. We had our share of characters, but in the main they were good, solid citizens. It was just a question of training them properly and motivating them properly and having the right officers and NCOs. When operations started, then for the first time the rest of the army saw what the R.L.I was all about, and they were absolutely magnificent right through the war. Later I finished my service, my tour, and I was due for retirement, and I was called back to start another unit called the Selous Scouts. Funny enough, you recall earlier on I mentioned this armoured car regiment which was disbanded when the Federation broke up, and the name was already chosen by Army Headquarters for this new regiment. The R.L.I, between the R.L.I and the Selous Scouts, I think that they accounted for most of the terrorists that were killed in that, and of course the Air Force, in that 7 years of the Selous Scouts' existence. The war, of course, people forget, went on for about 14 years. It started in about 67.
That was Cauldron and Nickel and those operations.
Cauldron was the first big operation the R.L.I were engaged on, and that's where they made their mark and opened the eyes of many people who passed disparaging remarks about them. A lot of the officers from the black regiments used to say, well, for the price of that European regiment, we could have 2 black battalions. But of course it was the quality that counted. And I'm not saying the black soldier didn't do a good job, he did a first-class job. But that R.L.I just had something special. They really were a fantastic battle unit.